China's diplomatic clash with Canada escalated sharply on Monday when the Canadian drug smuggler Robert Lloyd Schellenberg was sentenced to death by the Intermediate People's Court of Dalian in Liaoning Province. Well, Western media claim that the timing of his appeal and retrial could suggest that he's been dragged into the worsening diplomatic tensions between China and Canada after the Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou's arrest. So is Schellenberg's trial a political verdict? How will tensions evolve between the two countries? And where does the US fit into this whole scenario? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Dr. Jian Wenran, the adjunct professor from the University of British Columbia, and Hu Bo, an attorney from Anjie Law Firm, and Omar Osden, chairman of Rocktree Capital, who's joining us via Skype. He's a Canadian who got his Juris Doctor from New York. So, that's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Jeff Moody. Okay, let's start with you, Jian Wenran, if I can. Human Rights Watch has said that China is playing hostage politics. Do they have a point?
Well, the timing, I guess that's a speculation. But to say this is a hostage politics is pretty heavy charge. My understanding is that Schellenberg has been in the Chinese legal system since 2014, and the retrial speed has been rather fast. I think that might be the arousing some of the speculation, of course, with the timing of the Canada-China tensions, and that is, I think, the overall reaction from some quarters for sure.
But it's not just the timing of this retrial, it's the length of the retrial too, isn't it? I mean, it was so short. If you compare that to his original trial, which went on, he was detained more than a year before his first trial in March 2016, and he was not sentenced for a long time, and yet this has happened so quickly, hasn't it?
That is, in part, I think, is the problem and the shock. I know the Canadian media is headline all over the place. Now, we don't know the details. Is this the new trial evidence has been accumulating in the past several years when the retrial was ordered because of the China's investigative system? That's something there really clear, really accumulated, or it was rather a fairly abrupt one, as some people have argued and saying because the two countries are locked into a diplomatic confrontation, therefore this might be coming up to make a point. We don't know enough details. The Chinese certainly denied that. The Foreign Ministry spokeswoman basically said it's not a matter of the length of the trial, it is the evidence that accumulated. So we need to find out more.
Hu Bo, you're from Anjie Law Firm, so you're here to give us the legal angle on this. The sentence still has to be ratified by China's Supreme People's Court, doesn't it? So it's not a cut and done deal that he's going to die. How likely is it that he will?
I think it's very difficult to say. As Professor Jia said, the second trial, the retrial went very fast, and there's many controversial and debate on this, and also there's the tension between China and Canada. So the China also claimed we are legal jurisdiction, and we go through every legal procedures in all trials. So, but since this retrial goes so faster, went so faster, so maybe for the when it go to the Supreme Court, I doubted whether it will consider the whole picture, the whole sentence.
So there are various cogs wheels that need to be put into place. Dr. Osden, let's bring you into this. You're a Canadian. Now, your Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has condemned this proceeding. Obviously, he suggested that China is using its judicial system to put pressure on Canada, over the arrest of Meng Wanzhou. That's the chief financial officer of the Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei. How do you respond to that? Is this a tit for tat?
Well, I want to first clarify my perspective. I was born in Canada, so I'm a Canadian. I'm a U.S. lawyer, but I live between Beijing and New York. So I have a perspective from Chinese people, from Americans and Canadians, which are the three parties involved here. I think, in fairness to Prime Minister Trudeau, he did say in his speech that he has, every single time a Canadian is facing the death penalty, they have to make a protest, and this is a part of it. The death penalty is shocking to Canadians because there is no death penalty in Canada, and so it's something that is seen as very sensitive. But at the same time, the irony is that Ms. Meng Wanzhou has been detained in Canada, and it wasn't another company's executive, it wasn't another executive from Huawei, it was the daughter of the founder of Huawei. So from a Chinese perspective, this is also seen as political pressure and using the judicial system as pressure against China. I think that both sides have the perspective that it is pressure from the other side, and I think that they all have to understand that this is a matter, of course, of how China has sovereignty over its laws and how Canada and U.S. have sovereignty over their laws as well.
So, Dr. Osden, if tomorrow we find out that Meng Wanzhou's charges have been dropped, an apology is issued, you've done nothing wrong, it was all a big mistake, would we then find the day afterwards that Schellenberg's death sentence has been renounced?
So we don't know that because there's still two processes. It has to go to the High Court, and then it has to go to the Supreme People's Court in China. Article 347 of the criminal law of the People's Republic of China explicitly delineates methamphetamine as one of the narcotics or above 50 milligrams where you would get one of three sentences. And again, it was methamphetamine that he was smuggling. And it was not 50 milligrams, it was 222 kilograms. So it's very severe. And the three forms of penalty are 15 years in prison, life sentence, or death sentence. And that's what the court did. It exacted one of those three penalties in both trials. So I think that for the Canadian side, there will be a point in time where the Minister of Justice has a chance to deliberate this and look at if politics are playing a role in the extradition. And in that event, if there is some leniency in Ms. Meng's case, then we can see what perhaps the Supreme Court, the Supreme People's Court in China will do. But both sides have a very tough situation ahead of them. They have to deliberate this very carefully.
Chong Wen-ran, Dr. Osden makes a very interesting point there, I think, about the death penalty being abhorrent to Canadians. I mean, it's the same thing for me as a Brit. You know, the idea of putting somebody to death for a crime is something that doesn't sit very easily with us. But we're in China. We're in a different country with different rules, different values, a different culture. And if you don't like the punishments that a country metes out, don't commit your crimes in that country, surely.
It is surely the case. Canada abolished death penalty a long time ago. This is sending shockwaves through the Canadian public, but the Canadian public is also being informed, fair, reporting from different media outlets that Robert Schellenberg has a history of drug smuggling, and actually at one point back in 2012 when he was sentenced for 2 years in jail for drug possession and smuggling, the Canadian judge basically told him, you should be feeling lucky that you're living in one of the best countries on earth, meaning with no death penalty. So this one, many people feels that he has done this again. It might be difficult to get away with it because China has a very tough law on this.
The judge said, didn't he? He said, this is your opportunity now to change your ways, to change who you are, to choose a different path. And he came out of jail in Canada, came to China, which has one of the toughest drug laws on this planet, and started dealing again?
I mean, it's hard when you watch the human being on TV as a young man, at his age in mid-30s, committing this and may face death penalty. It's just something very personal to many people. In Canada, the foreign minister herself, Freeland, mentioned about this. So therefore, let's see about the 10 days appeal process, whether there might be a leniency applying to it, because the Canadian government has already asked the Chinese ambassador to Canada for passing the message of a leniency appeal. So I still hope that this will not carry out. But against the history of China's very tough laws against foreigners who struggle drugs and then being put to death, this is not optimistic. Yeah.
Hubal, what do you feel personally about the death penalty?
Actually, as a Chinese, I think sometimes maybe it's necessary to have the death penalty. So I understand most of countries abandon the death penalty. But for certain severe criminal, I think if there's no death penalty, how can we face the victim's family? So.
Very interesting point. And you're saying that unless the punishment is severe,
yeah.
How can you look in the face of the family of the victims? I mean, obviously, when it comes to drug smuggling, it's very difficult to work out who the victims are. They're very often victims that aren't a victim at that time. Somebody buys crystal meths that have come from Schellenberg. They're not necessarily going to die. They could use it for recreational purposes and be fine. So it's very difficult to find a villain necessarily. Sorry, to find a victim in this case, isn't it?
It is difficult, but the overall toughness and the very strict nature of the Chinese legislations against drug smuggling and processing and using is a historically sensitive one. China went through the Opium Wars back in 19th century, imposed no other than by the British
I'm sorry
at the time.
about that. I wasn't born at the time, but I would like to apologize.
You are not.
On behalf of my nation.
So therefore, the rehabilitation process for drug addict in the 1950s, when the People's Republic of China was established, was a painful one for millions of them. Now there are more than millions of people now in China abuse drugs. So these are also reality. But that being said, China has been actually exercising more judiciously on death penalty for carrying it out. I hope this case may actually fall into that category, no matter how the tensions are politically between Canada and China.
Dr. Osden, you're speaking to us now from near Singapore, you tell us. Now, from where you are geographically, Malaysia has one of the toughest regulations in the world. China, one of the toughest drugs regulation in the world. Vietnam, crimes are taken. If you're arrested with more than 1.3 pounds of heroin, you're automatically executed. You just have to move a little bit west. You've got Iran, it's very similar. Go down to Thailand, trafficking narcotics may be put to death. Dubai, Saudi Arabia, the list goes on. Why is the eastern part of the world much tougher on drugs than they are in the West?
Well, I have to agree with my colleague. With respect to China, specifically, it relates to history and the Opium Wars. I think that with respect to Western societies, there's a new way of thinking that we could classify and schedule drugs into, not compartmentalize them as all the same, and look at the various degrees of harm and schedule them based on that. The irony of this case is that there are two particular narcotics in the West, and when I mean the West, I mean Canada, United States, and even Australia to a certain degree, that have been devastating, that have resulted in tens of thousands of deaths per year. And one of them is fentanyl, which is a synthetic form of opium, and another is methamphetamine, which is the drug that we're dealing with here. And both of these are manufactured in various areas of the world. the United States government, the Canadian government, and other governments have asked various countries to request that they enforce their laws much more stricter in terms of smuggling these types of specific narcotics to their home countries. That's exactly what happened here. Methamphetamine was destined to arrive on the streets of Sydney and Melbourne, 500 pounds of it, and the Chinese authorities did their job. And so I think that Western society should take a look at this, and their policies are not necessarily more lenient. It's with respect to certain drugs they may be more lenient, but with other types of drugs, such as these ones, they can be quite severe, and they've asked for cooperation from other countries to be severe, and that's what we have in this case.
Chong Wenran, let's look at this diplomatic row and try and open this up a little bit more, because this isn't just an individual case, isn't it? Because earlier China arrested a former diplomat, Michael Kovrig, and Michael Spava, I hope I pronounced that right,
yes,
who's a businessman under suspicion of endangering national security. So how do we look at the implications of those arrests? Because now Justin Trudeau is saying to Canadians, be careful when you go to China. Be careful. He's advising Canadians not to come to China at the moment. Has he got a point?
Well, the caution came after the announcement of the death penalty for Robert Schellenberg. The two arrested Canadians very shortly after the arrest of Meng Wanzhou, and therefore there is widespread speculation about tit-for-tat nature of this. But I think the two countries so far, in my opinion, being an academic based in Canada, I think the two countries have failed diplomatically to manage it from not escalating further. You have a situation that each country are accusing the other side of arbitrary detention of their own citizens and asking for immediate release, and neither side is backing down. So we have a situation now that, is it a schoolyard kind of confrontation, or should be the adult thinking coming in, saying, let's talk about rationally how to resolve crisis. So I thought it's better to cool off a little bit on both sides to say, let's talk, let's explain to each other on what it is, rather than accusing each other of saying, I'm the civilized, I'm the lawful, you're the uncivilized, you're the barbaric. In nature, is that what people are saying to each other on each side? That does not solve the problem, in my opinion.
Boy, is that what needed? Do we just need to sit down and talk?
Excuse me?
Do we need to just sit and talk? Does China and Canada do they just sit round a table like this and have a communication?
I think it's necessary for both parties to sit down and discuss the issues. So, because like the Chinese diplomatic, when they respond to the Canada Prime Minister's comments, it's quite tough, but I don't think tough can solve the problem. Maybe there's some misunderstanding to each country's jurisdiction systems, and both parties need to understand the other side's jurisdiction system and the law enforcement system, etc.
Dr. Osdom, obviously there's the personal issue here. Obviously, we were hearing that Canadians are very concerned. This doesn't sit very easily with Canadians because it is the death penalty, even though we understand that this guy, has had ample warnings to change his ways. But there's also trade. There's also the business between these two countries. And China and Canada reached $35 billion worth of trade in the first half of 2018 alone. China remains the second largest trading partner to Canada. So there's a real impetus here, not just for the human side of this story, but for trade and business as well, isn't it? There's an impetus to sort this out.
Absolutely. And I think that we can't forget our history together of China and Canada and the cooperation and friendship in the past. Bai Chuan, Dr. Norman Bethune is a good example of somebody like that. The Canadian Governor General, which is a title which is actually ceremonial, but higher than the Prime Minister of Canada was formerly, the former Governor General was Canadian Chinese. And also, Canada was the first major Western nation to recognize the People's Republic of China in 1970, even before it had a seat in the United Nations. In terms of trade, I think we should look at the example of Australia and China. The amount of trade between Australia and China is a multiple of what it is between China and Canada. While Australia and Canada are similar in population and size and types of economies, there's a lot of resources and even technology that are available for China from Canadians and from Canada. And there's a lot of business that Canadians can do with Chinese companies, Chinese industry, and receive Chinese investment, especially in the context of increasing protectionism and tariffs from the United States. So that delta is indeed the opportunity that we should be seeking. So we should look at dialogue, and we should look at cooperation, the past friendship we've had, and continue that friendship to do business together.
Interesting that you bring up the United States there, because of course this all began because of Meng Wanzhou. That was the thing that began this whole issue, her arrest in Canada. And Donald Trump in the States is saying that he is totally prepared to intervene in this case. What's it got to do with the United States?
So I think that statement by Donald Trump is prima facie evidence that actually Ms. Meng's detention is political and not related to the merits of the case. Certainly Ms. Meng's lawyers as defense are going to use that argument, and that will be the most persuasive argument that will be put before the Minister of Justice in Ottawa to avoid extradition of Ms. Meng to the United States. That's first. So in that context, we can say it's political, but I think also if we, we should be looking for incidents where positive things have resulted. If we look at another case that occurred concurrently with this case, which is the case of Liu Changdong, the founder of JD.com, that occurred around the relative same time, and that case, that particular issue, was looked at and analyzed based on its merits. Mr. Liu was allowed to return to China, and after investigation, no charges were filed. And that is within a very sensitive context of the Me Too movement within the United States. So that could have easily gone very bad for a very important business figure within China, Mr. Liu. But it actually was looked at on its merits and fairly. So I think both sides, China has to take a look at, there is fairness within America. Canadian authorities are trying to do things and extend olive branches, and the Chinese authorities are also trying to fairly and extend olive branches as well in China as well. There were 13 Canadians apparently detained. 8 were released immediately. One was given an administrative penalty for overstay of visa, and we're really left down to 2 or 3 detainees. But one was a case that predated Ms. Meng's detention.
I want to bring this one to you, Jiang Wenran, if I may. Interesting that we were hearing from Dr. Osman there about the role of JD.com, because of course the other thing in this saga that we haven't really discussed yet is the role of Huawei, who is one of the world's leading tech giants. Huawei, I've recently come back from a trip to the United Kingdom for Christmas, and nearly every TV advert is advertising Huawei phones. Their star is rising at the moment. They're taking on the big giants like Apple. And then all of this happens. I mean, they've just terminated the contract of a Chinese worker who was arrested in Poland on spying allegations, of all things. What damage is this going to do to Huawei? And therefore, what damage is this going to do to the Chinese economy?
Well, Huawei is the largest communications equipment producer in the world, and now has overtaken Apple as the second largest smartphone producer. I mean, it's actually leading everybody else in the 5G development network. Absolutely important for China. We can talk all about the legal aspects, Canada, US, fairness, but there is this very convincing argument. People are saying the United States and the partners, the Five Eyes intelligence sharing countries of the English-speaking countries, are actually targeting at Huawei and trying to take it out in terms of competition. So there is this political elements to it. In the Meng's case, many people think it's politically motivated. In Poland's case, that was individual situation. Huawei was not featured into that arrest, the company. So therefore, it's complex in many dimensions to this.
Well, it is. I mean, the father of Meng Wanzhou, who's the founder of Huawei, he's broken years of silence to deny that Huawei is spying on behalf of the Chinese government, and he's had to defend on record his political views. He's a very ardent supporter of the Chinese government, has been for many, many years, decades in fact, and people are now accusing him, rightly or wrongly, of using his political beliefs to influence his company. Let's bring this one to you. Is that a fair accusation, do you think? Do you think his politics are anything to do with his business?
I don't think so. I think Mr. Ren is a businessman, and I think it is right that he made the statement that Huawei has complied with the laws of the Western jurisdictions. But I think what happened obviously will have some effect on his business in Western world, but I think it will take time for the Western world to really understand and know what kind of company Huawei is.
Will it damage them, do you think? Do you see Huawei's stock falling?
Not necessarily. A lot of this focus on Huawei may actually have a counter impact, that many Chinese are becoming more pro-Huawei, which is interesting. And the appeal by Ren Zhengfei himself may fall onto deaf ears for those who want to take Huawei out, period. Because they're against Huawei not because what Huawei has done. There's no evidence Huawei has done spying, but they're against Huawei for Huawei, what Huawei is, and for what China is, and that is a problem.
That's a very interesting point. So in a way, this is like China bashing. Huawei is getting so big. Huawei is starting to lead the market share in other countries, and people don't like that. Fascinating debate. It's a scandal that has so many different levels, doesn't it? It's got the political intrigue, it's got some spying in it as well, you know, it's got drug smuggling, but of course we've also got to remember that it has human beings, and
Absolutely.
even if we don't have particular sympathy for Mr. Schellenberg, he has a family, and he has people that love him, and it's a very difficult situation all round. Fascinating and confusing as well. But for now, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Hu Bo, the attorney from Anjie Law Firm, Dr. Jiang Renran, and Dr. Omar Osden, who is talking to us there on Skype. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's it from me for now for this edition of Dialogue. Yang Ray will be back tomorrow with his usual programme at his usual time, but from me and the team, thank you very much indeed for watching. Bye-bye.